Please welcome first-time DynamicsCon speaker, Conor Doyle. His session will cover the 5 levels of customer data management. Please stick around after Conor's session for a live Q&A.
So welcome, my name is Conor Doyle. I'm Head of Sales at DQ Global, and welcome to today's presentation on the 5 levels of customer data management. Before we start, I just want to make a special shout out to DynamicsCon. I really enjoyed the event when I went to Denver earlier this year, and it's great to be able to come back and speak virtually. Hopefully we'll all see you in Chicago, but shout out to the folks there. They're doing an amazing job and bringing the community together. So thank you to all the team and hope to see you soon. So today's presentation, we're going to look into the 5 levels of customer data management. And hopefully I can explain a little bit more about what that is, how it came about, and how you can actually use it in your organization. So what are today's objectives? Well, I think we've got to start by understanding the fundamentals of data quality, distinguishing between good and bad data quality, and then we can kind of move on to the next subject, next topics, once we've built that foundation. And that's something that we'll run through the presentation, is talking about the foundations, because that is what data is really underpinning around our AI world nowadays. We're then going to move on to some real world examples. I love talking about data in context, and that's going to have an even bigger impact, and hopefully you can resonate with those objectives and really look to how others have overcome obstacles and how you might be able to do that as well. Finally, then, we're going to look at some practical strategies that you can take away and hopefully put into some sort of data governance framework, maybe some useful questions that you can take either personally or back into the business that you're working in to really accelerate and make you think long and hard about the data that's underpinning your organization and how you can really accelerate the products that are underpinned by data quality. So a little bit about us. I work for a company called DQ Global. We help organizations who are grappling with their data and really finding that it's a painful and time-consuming task. And really, we're working with Microsoft partners and ISVs when it comes to that space. So our first objective, what is good and bad data? Well, first, I think we've got to look at, and maybe this is a little different because of the people listening at this presentation, but we came up with this concept where you have the great data quality delusion. So, we think everyone believes that data quality is important. So here are some pillars that everyone might think are true, that everyone understands the importance of data quality. Maybe not. We could have this delusion that everyone agrees data quality is important. We could also believe that everyone cares about data quality, not necessarily the case, and that everyone wants to take an action to actually improve the quality of the data. And a little bit slapstick, but when you're looking in the mirror, maybe people or organizations believe that this is the picture that they're seeing, whereas when they turn around, we've actually got Homer Simpson standing in the mirror. So something lighthearted, but hopefully something that you might be able to relate to when you're looking at the data within your organization, and trying to keep it a little bit light before we dig into a little bit more of the detail. So let's formalize this a little bit more. So what are the key aspects of data quality? Now, some people might actually be familiar with some of these terms. These are the data quality dimensions. We're going to walk through these. These are something that you can actually take back to an organization. They come from from Dharma. And if we start to walk through these, we look at number 1 here. We look at accuracy. So accuracy is as simple as, is the data correct? So my birthday, if I take that and I put it in a date format, and then suddenly you change the date or you flip the month and the day of the month, suddenly you've got an inaccurate representation of someone's birthday. So it's quite a simple metric. It's either right or it's wrong. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar is completeness. And that is where you're looking at, let's take an address block, and we have 5 elements. How many of those elements are complete, and therefore as a percentage of the critical fields within a record or an organization or a table, how are we measuring that? And obviously that gives us a quantifiable measure as to what have we got on this record or this record of this person or this company, and could we improve on that metric? Have we got the critical fields in place? So again, quite an easy one to measure. We then move on to number 3, where we look at consistency. And this is probably one of the pillars that I see as one of the most challenging, especially across organizations that work in multiple different countries, because different countries have different standardizations. If we take the date field and we run on that, here in the UK, we use DD, YYYY. So obviously our date formats. In the US, those are going to be flipped. So the month comes first, and then we've got the day. They work for 12/12/2005, but then when you start to obviously have different values, they're just inaccurate, and they're also inconsistent. So standardizing, putting a standard out there, data governance framework, is going to aid you in consistency, and we'll get on to some of the reasons as to why this is an impact down the line. That's number 3. The 4th pillar is timeliness, something that's really quite difficult to measure, specifically because we don't necessarily have triggers around when pieces of data change. It's all fine or good when someone updates a portal because they've moved house or they've changed their details. However, if you haven't got that, you've got to go out to other reference data sources to know that people have moved, gone away, passed away, etc., so that we can trace them, not in necessarily a creepy way, more that we can provide a quality of service that is to the expectation of an organization. So timeliness is a difficult one, but it's most certainly quite important in measuring in these data quality dimensions. We look at relevance, and relevance is a little bit more subjective compared to something like completeness. Relevance is looking at something and saying, well, is this data this piece of information that we're holding, is it actually relevant to what we're trying to achieve? Should we be holding someone's passport information when we don't need that information whatsoever? So is it relevant to the product or service or, service that we're offering? So again, slightly hard one, but I think we should always put data into context. And again, we'll cover that off at a slightly later date. And the 6th pillar here, we're looking at uniqueness. A little bit easier to measure the uniqueness of a database. You're typically looking at records and whether you have a single customer view within that database. So typically you want that single pane of glass, and you want that golden record within the database. Otherwise, you're going to be recording different pieces of information, and you're not going to be able to work collaboratively. So quite an important factor and quite an easy one to measure as well. By the way, if anyone has any questions on any of these pillars or would like any more information, please drop a message in the chat. There's a Q&A, and I'd be happy to take any questions as we go along. So, I'm innocent. It mustn't be me. It must be someone else. I thought what we'd do is we'd take a look at some of the common pitfalls of data quality. Hopefully you can relate to this, and I'm sure you can add to some of these as well. So again, pop them in the chat as we go along. So reasons why poor quality data occurs. Well, reason number 1, we're going to look at human error. Here are some kind of fun answers. We will dig into a little bit more of a serious takeaways at the end. But I like this one here where it says a boy's name beginning with the letter J, and someone came up with the answer Gerald. We've got a word beginning with Z here, and we've got xylophone. Phonetically sounds the same, but doesn't begin with Z. The part of the body beginning with N is obviously the knee. And what month of pregnancy does a woman begin to look pregnant? The most common answer that came up was September. So a little bit of an odd one there, and maybe some of the people in the audience take a bit of a laugh at those. So, reason number 2, misinterpretation. Again, I was talking about the context back in those data quality pillars, and lacking data standards. One database, M means male, another database, it means married. We've got S means single or S means separated. We've got to have that context, and we've got to have some standards in order to understand what this piece of data actually means. And we've got some lovely variants here. We've got Porrick spelt in all the different Irish variants. I'm sure there's some Irish heritage or listening on the call, or people who have Irish heritage. We've got Lane, LN, Road, RD. We've got Michigan, States, long, short. We've got US spelt in all its different forms. I'm sure people have seen these in the database. So the point is, we've got to try and standardize this data so that we can interpret it and catalog it in the correct way. Number 3, confusion over Boolean logic. And this kind of links back to the context around M or S being male or single or separated, etc. But understanding how Boolean logic works, so okay to male equals yes, or not okay to male equals yes, really can be quite confusing, and you try and wrap your head around them. But again, it's important that we standardize them, know the display name and the schema name and what those represent, because otherwise what we're going to have is a mass mail going out to a load of people who have asked not to be mailed. And here in the UK, that is a big challenge around GDPR, CAN-SPAN in Canada, North America. And obviously that's something that people really need to keep in mind. And it's such an easy mistake to make. And then we look at some validity or precision or format we've touched on, consistency, around dates that are just not valid. And we've seen these in people's databases where we've got 999999. It's obviously not a valid date. We've got formats where we've got European or US dates. Again, I've touched on that a little bit earlier, but you can see some of the confusion caused by these date fields. Final reason, same thing, but not the same string. And again, this is big in the uniqueness world, because you might think that you have two different records or 2 different values, but actually when you interrogate the data and look a little bit more closely, you see that it's not necessarily the case. I had a fantastic one come through the other day. I heard from someone, actually 2. One was that they found records in their database who they thought were 2 different people. And after 32 years of this person being in the database, they finally resolved it to the same person. Had been hiding in the database all that time. And a fantastic one I heard, again, I was speaking to someone at an event last week. Someone thought it would be cool to put a number plate on their car, and they had null on there. And null, they got a speeding ticket, it registered on the camera, and all of they found that they had thousands of tickets come to their home. The reason that was because all values that were null in that database got sent out to that person. So just a simple data error showing how it has a real world impact. And sometimes it comes down to these string differences when they're actually the same thing. So it's tough, right? And this is something that we see in conversations, but there's actually some stats here to back it up from some pretty large organizations. So 56% of firms mention questionable data quality as a major challenge. And it'll be interesting, some people in the chat again, if you're seeing that within your organization. It's an open forum here. Is that a challenge? Can we discuss that? More than happy to do so. Happy to reach out to me, even if you don't want to on the chat, reach out to me directly. There'll be some contact information at the end here. And we're looking at 47% of records that are newly created have a critical error. And again, measuring that, those data quality dimensions that I was talking about, you can use factors to measure accuracy of data. You could measure factors to look at the consistency or completeness of data. Have you got all of your critical fields completed is maybe a starting basis. And that comes from HPR. So, not a small source there. And then finally, the one that I find the most impactful, and I think it will provide a little bit more context when I show the next slide, is that 84% of organizations find that they are making decisions on data where they're concerned about the integrity of that data. So huge decisions that large corporates and small organizations are making when the data underpinning just cannot be trusted. So with that in mind, we came up with this concept about the leaning tower of data. And this is hopefully setting a bit of context in the world of AI that we're living in now, and why data, we believe, is so important in that journey. So if anyone hasn't seen the Leaning Tower of Pisa, it is 3.9 degrees off center. And we try to use that concept when we're talking about data. So data is underpinning our applications here. And if you're familiar with the DIKW concept, we layer on top data. So a piece of data is 1, 0. If I said to you 5, it literally means nothing, or it could mean multiple things. As soon as I say 5 feet or 5 meters, it starts to have context. And that is where we have information. From information, we then have knowledge. So if you're 2 meters below sea level, your knowledge is probably or you're probably telling yourself, I should be concerned here that my house might get flooded, especially if you're near the coast. So that's about putting data in context with other external factors. And the wisdom is, I should probably move, or I'm probably going to have a house, or I'm going to have an area that I'm in flooded when the tide rises. So trying to layer up from data just being pure ones and zeros or numbers up to as we go up to the tree. And really the wisdom is where we're getting into the data and AI space. So if we take the Leaning Tower of Data and we break those foundations, just like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, that's why it's gone a bit lopsided, and we layer on top our app data, our CRM data, our reports and dashboards, which is just telling us what's there, and then we try and make decisions or derive insights out the back of that. If that's broken, we have this distortion from the truth. And that distortion from the truth goes back to that 84% where C-suite individuals feel like they're making decisions on data that doesn't have its integrity or doesn't have high quality data to report on. So, enough doom and gloom. What are we going to do about it? Or what do we need to do? Well, it's a bit of a data management ball of grief. It's a complex task. It's a risky task, but I'm hoping we can try and break this down for you. We have a few different things, and you've probably heard of the 5 W's and the how, is try and break this down into a more manageable concept or journey. And we have this thing called the data management ball of grief. Again, it sounds a little bit doom and gloom still, but we're going to break this down. At the center here, we have a single customer view. And we're talking here about the CRM space, or focused on the CRM space. That is the eureka, the perfect area that you want to get to is a single customer view. But wrapped around all of that are all of these factors. We've touched on them slightly. Completeness, uniqueness, timeliness, validity. We've all talked about those as factors. However, we have other things in there like, is this a parent? Is this a child record? And I might mean that as in this is the father or mother of, or is this the parent company or child company? So we've got to look at different factors, and these are some of the things that we need to look at. And we can start to unpick these. So what do we need to break it down to? Well, unraveling that, we want to look at it in the simple stage of we have inputs and we have outputs. And we're going to take this piece of data or this record on a journey. And what that journey might look like is this as we start to unravel it. And hopefully we won't knot ourselves up as we go along. We have the source on our left-hand side, we have the target on our right-hand side, Microsoft Dynamics. So what are we going to have to do along the way? Well, we might need to format things into a standard and a framework. We might need to validate things. And in our world, that means check that an email looks like an email, check that a date field is a valid date field. And you can do all these checks as we go along. Do we need to parse out a piece of information? Have we got an address block? And do we need to pick out street one, city, zip, postcode, country? And do we need to parse it into other fields? Do we need to verify? Do we need to go out to a reference data set? You might go out to the US Postal Service. You might go out to Royal Mail here in the UK as reference data sets to improve the quality and completeness of your data. You may go and authenticate a piece of data. You may go and truly check whether it will deliver. That's an email, that's a telephone number. It's a bit like going and knocking on someone's door. And you can do that now. Can you enhance a piece of information? There's lots of reference data out there. And I touched on that slightly in the verify piece. Suppress. Have people moved? So therefore we need to suppress that record. Have they gone away? Or unfortunately, have they passed away? And therefore, we need to mark them appropriately in the database or remove them totally. Have we got rules? Do we need to split off pieces of data to different systems or different users because there's different security privileges? Do we need to try and create a single customer view? Do we need to match data together and again bring things to a common form? We might need to make decisions on the data, and you might do that in a rules logic. Do we need to make a single record view? And above all, do we need to master data across systems? It could be Dynamics 365 to BC. It might be D365 to F&O. It might be to another ecosystem of applications that sit outside. And we may need to put, you may be able to do this with tools that are in the Microsoft world, or you may need to reach out to partners, ISVs. There are people with great solutions and expertise in order to achieve and unravel this data management ball of grief. Any questions or anyone who'd like to know a little bit more about those parts, please feel free, drop a question in the chat. And as I've spoken about, we want to get to this golden record, this single version of the truth, and that is the perfect area. So what can we do? Well, I came up with this concept around the 5 levels of customer data management. And the reason I've done this is primarily to identify where you are on the 5 levels and then appropriately select where you believe you should be so that then you can plot your journey. Just because there is a level 5 doesn't mean you need to get to level 5. I will just emphasize that. So let's walk through those 5 levels. We have a blissfully unaware stage, and I liken this to a baby state, and how I'd maybe like to go back to this state at times. But this is a state where you may not even realize you have a data quality challenge. And that is absolutely fine. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who would actually want to get to that stage. It's okay. It may evolve. You may be getting to level 2, 3, 4, and 5 very quickly. But yeah, the blissfully unaware is your starting point. We then have a reactive stage, which is the child state. And I liken this to when my mum used to ask me to make my bed. So every morning when I was 7, 8, 9 years old, Conor, can you make your bed? I'll go, yeah, fine, I'll go and do it. The reason I'm saying this is because a lot of organizations are in a stage where they go, hey, I'd like to push out this report or analytics, or I'd like to send out a marketing campaign, or I'd like to do some business development. What data shall I use? And then the organization goes, oh, I'm not sure. We need to look at the data. We need to analyze the data. Oh, there's missing data. Give us a month and we'll get it sorted. A very reactive approach. And again, that's okay when there's small volumes of data involved or there's long planning going into these initiatives. However, that's not typically the case. That's not how the world works. We change and pivot so much. I would say this is probably one of the most common stages. And again, it doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's a stage to identify yourself as an organization. As we move up another level, we've got more of a proactive approach. You will be happy to hear that when I was 10 or 11 or 12 years old, I started to make my own bed just off my own back. So this is a more proactive approach. This is where you are either building up a framework internally, you've brought in expertise, you've spoken to your Microsoft partner, you might have spoken to an ISV with a product, and suddenly you're proactive around this approach. You are surfacing duplicates, you're standardizing data, you're scoring data maybe to try and quantify this unknown of data that you have in your ecosystem. And I think this is a real game changer. And I think potentially an endpoint to where a lot of organizations could move to and see huge amounts of benefits quite easily as well with a small amount of investment. If we move up, we then get to a level where we move to continuous improvement. I liken this to when you start going to the gym. You don't just lift those heavy weights and you end up like a bodybuilder or Arnie. It's a long, continuous process. And I will just emphasize, this is like painting the bridge in San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge. As soon as you get to the end, I think it's maybe 4 years it takes to paint that bridge, they're going back to the start. This is an iterative process, especially as you get to larger data volumes. And it is a continuous improvement. And I have a use case later on to paint a picture in the real world about how an organization went about this and how it might look in your world. Finally, enterprise-wide, not right for everyone. Not everyone's an enterprise organization. We've got Yoda level, hopefully something that everyone will relate to. This is where you've got to be wise. You've got to get across the whole organization. You've got to bring in that wise uncle who's going to lead the initiative. And it's got to tie all of those pieces, organizations, applications together, because you get these disparate systems, data silos, and it really needs to be thought through. And again, I have an example about how an organization went about that, was able to do that. Again, any thoughts, pop them in the chat. Would love to hear your thoughts about where you're identifying yourself along this customer journey. So let's take a look at data management in the real world. So here we have a level 3 example that someone might look to implement. This is taking you from a reactive state to a proactive state. What might you want to do? Well, if you take Conor, C-O-N-O-R, which is how I spell it, Irish version, we've got Conor spelled C-O-N-N-O-R. You might even put an E-R on the end. I haven't seen it yet, but there may be a K, K-O-N-O-R, because phonetically it still sounds the same. And there's loads of variants on that. Thompson spelt, Christopher spelt in all different variants. I'm sure you all have your own versions. So trying to get down to the common form, and it goes down to the uniqueness thing again, is applying fuzzy matching so that we can bring together those strings that are the same thing. So we bring those records together. Okay, fantastic. I've got 5 Conors in the database. What you then want to do is throw it to a review screen where I can see all of those records side by side. It's quite a painful process when you go and have that one-to-one comparison. And there's some great tools out there that can help you with that multi-record comparison. Then finally, it's quite a painful process going and reviewing these records, especially where you're confident that they are duplicate records. If they are duplicate records, we want to automate that process. There's some great solutions out there to be able to say, which record do I want to select as my master or primary? How do I want to fill the data? And then merge them in the background. So there's solutions out there that can merge thousands of duplicate records all at once. So what might a review screen look like? Well, here's an example where you've got 4 records, and you might want to collapse those duplicates down so that you have that single version of the truth. And in this example, James Bond is there, something everyone can hopefully relate to. You want one James Bond classified job title at his address when he's moving around. So an example of how you might empower yourself as users to use a screen like this. So let's have a look at another use case. Let's look at level 4, which is a continuous improvement. And this was quite interesting because in the recruitment world, there's a lot of data flowing around the ecosystem. And I think that's when it becomes really quite challenging. You see that in the not-for-profit space. You see that in the recruitment space, hospitality space. And financial services, you just can't afford to get it wrong. So it's really important that we're continually improving our processes because there are such high volumes of data coming into the ecosystem. So here's an example. I'll just walk you through this. This is a graph where it's plotting the number of support tickets coming through. And you can see plot number 1 there. You can see there wasn't really too much of a challenge around duplicates. There was about 100 every month, maybe 150 coming through to the support desk. The organization from the top down, C-suite, went, hey, data quality is really important. We need everyone to highlight the challenges, and we need you to merge those records. Lo and behold, be careful what you wish for, because it might just happen. The people who were flagging the duplicate records didn't have merge rights, and they all got lumbered onto the support desk. Hence the increase in support tickets, and you're going up to step number 2 there. Support desk was overrun, couldn't go through these tickets. You're now up at 400, 450 tickets per month. They're just building up. They weren't being cleared. They went to an increased number of tickets, up to 700 duplicate tickets there at point number 3. And this is really where I saw the organization switch their mentality. They looked at, hey, could we hire more people on the support desk, or could we look to implement a solution that is going to help us to find duplicate records, throw them to a review screen, and automate that process. So they were using that review process. It was very manual. They looked to improve that process through automation. And what I just love here is how the drop off there from point 3 to point 4 in terms of support tickets. And that tailed off as you go along. So they identified a challenge. They looked on how they could improve that so that then they could they could take that proactive level to the next step. And here on the right hand side, you see, huge amount of users, huge amount of records, huge amount of duplicates that have been removed, and a massive amount of time and effort saved in this process of continual improvement. So final use case here, and this is looking at Yoda level, and not for everyone, but worth noting if people are in this world and finding themselves banging their head against a brick wall when it comes to data management. It's a use case for a hospitality client where people were booking on through booking.com or directly or through travel agents. And Conor was coming and staying at a hotel group. He was coming through Oracle Hospitality, and we had this record coming through the system, coming through an enterprise service bus. Some people might be using this in the enterprise world, a messaging service. This record, rather than just going into the system, was then going to be checked. And the reason it was going to be checked was because if myself, and we use Conor, C-O-N-O-R, came on to book to stay at this hotel, and then in the database they had Conor spelled C-O-N-N-E-R. If I just use that simple example, using standard string matching, you would not be able to find the record that was in the database and say I stayed there for 5, 6, 7 times and I was a valued client, would not be found. And therefore, you wouldn't attribute my stay to the record that was in the database. So that was one of the main challenges. This is the 5-star hotel group. It's a big challenge. They want to provide 5-star service. They want to know if I've stayed there before so that they can deliver that high-end service. So an approach that could be taken is a set of data quality or data management services that could allow you to then interrupt the insertion of a record into Dynamics 365. And the orchestration would look something like this. And I hope this is something that that people could take away as a potential orchestration, especially if you're using this elements of this architecture already. So the record comes and it gets cleansed. And cleanse could mean road goes to RD. It could mean a email or a telephone number gets standardized. It could mean that Conor, C-O-N-N-E-R or C-O-N-O-R, would get standardized. And the reason you do that is because we want to search into the database. So we've got Conor now, and we're going to find Conor in the database rather than just inserting him as a new record. So we either find Conor or we don't. If we don't find him, absolutely fine. Let him in the database. We've got a new customer coming to stay. If we do find him, we then need to master that record. We need to say, ooh, I've got Conor Doyle. I've got a new address. I've got his LinkedIn ID. I've got a new telephone number. You may then want to update the record in Microsoft Dynamics so that you have that latest information and that single customer view. You may find multiple records, and again, they can be sent out to be reviewed. And here you've got a set of records that might go through that process. But the important thing to note here is we're now entering into the master data management world. And the difference between single customer view and master data management is single customer view would be looking at a single record within Microsoft Dynamics, bringing it down to a point of singularity. Master data management is about managing data across two environments. You've got Microsoft Dynamics here, but we need to remember that we've got Oracle on the left-hand side here, and we need to make sure those two systems are in sync. So what we're going to do is, you see this record in this illustration is going to write back to MuleSoft. MuleSoft is then going to send a message back to Oracle, because if we've changed the record in Dynamics, we need to make sure it's in updated back in Oracle. And now we've got our two worlds back in sync. Again, not for everyone, this use case, but if you are there, an architecture that has been used successfully that you might want to take on board. So some considerations. I've touched on them already, but when would you use these? Some factors to consider. So timeliness, a huge one. When should we be reactive? When should we be proactive? Well, it really depends on the industry you're working in. And I know that's another point here, but if you're looking at something where you're applying for a loan or a mortgage, well, if that record makes it into the system and suddenly all these automated checks go on and suddenly you get provided with a mortgage and that has repercussions, then time cannot wait. You've got to get it up front. You've got to look at something like the enterprise level architecture where you're doing near real time data management. If you're looking at something that's not so time sensitive, and I'm not going to pick on an industry here because all industries are time sensitive, where that piece of data is a bit more static and doesn't need to be acted on, then that's okay. Take a more reactive approach. Take a slightly proactive approach so that you don't have that data management ball of grief when you come along to tackling it. So think about the timeliness of the data and think how sensitive the data is. Touched on it with that loan example. If it does have repercussions, make sure you nip it in the bud and you sort out that piece of data early. Spoken on industry, especially industries where there are high volumes of data, not-for-profits, recruitment, financial services, hospitality, big challenge areas. Got to look at the volumes of records. Where these volumes get into the millions, the 5 millions, the 7 millions, it's painful. I would urge you not to throw resource at that. Try and automate the process. It may be slightly more painful to start with, but down the line, you will reap the benefits. I promise. You've got to look at system compatibility. We look there at an example with Oracle integrating with Microsoft Dynamics. Fantastic. That's great. There are other factors in there, like you've got to use potentially MuleSoft or another piece of ETL software. It's easier in the Microsoft world, but we've got to be realistic. Not all organizations run everything in the Microsoft space. So just got to be conscious of that when we're going, oh, this wonderful architecture, how is it going to glue together? You've got to look at internal resources and expertise. Some organizations, fantastic, you've got this resource that can help with this. Equally, I would be conscious about saying we need to hire this resource and going out and spending a whole load of money only to find that you don't get the return on investment on that. So make sure that you start small. And I think this is why I wanted to discuss this 5 levels of data management and grow with a program. When you get to continuous level 4, level 5, that's where you want to get into the world of dedicated resource for data management, data governance. I would also make sure that you future pace your technology or future proof your technology. You look at the future initiatives. Where is the business going? We always talk about data being a business challenge rather than a technological challenge. You've got to start with where the business is going, the business objectives, and then we underpin that with the correct decisions and initiatives that are put in place. Again, more than happy to talk about that. We've seen some great decisions, maybe not so such good ones. More than happy to discuss that. And finally, are these some of the dilemmas that you face? Some questions that I won't go into too much detail in, but something you might want to take away to your organization. Is it better that you keep the data, or do you upgrade the application? Some organizations say, it's the application, it's D365, it's this, it's that. 70% of CRM implementations fail because of poor quality data. And I heard another stat, and it aligns with 70%, is only 30% of customers stay with a partner after 5 years. And I find that absolutely mad, because partners are doing a fantastic job, but I feel like the data is really getting blamed for the downfalls, and it's not the application. Do we need better data? Do we need better analytics? Power BI, or is it a data problem? Is it the data integrity, or is it the application performance? Is it just not working for you? Should we standardize the data, or should we start to customize the application? Should we look at data cleansing or a software upgrade? Again, these are questions to pose to your internally, or ask yourself to think about after this presentation. And again, here another one: data enrichment or software automation. So, to recap, we've got the 5 levels of data management, of customer data management. The emphasis here is there is no right or wrong answer. The reason I came up with this concept is primarily so that you can identify where you are on this journey and where you need to be. So once you can identify where you are, you can then plot your journey. So please take this away. If it helps, discuss it internally. If it helps, show these slides. If it helps, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to discuss this. And I want to close on one note. What's in it for you? What's in it for the business? Again, I said underpinning data quality around the business objectives. Better data. And again, data layers, data, information, knowledge, and wisdom, going back to that leaning tower of data. So we're moving up the tree. We're looking at the foundations here. We have better decisions and ultimately a better business. That is why we need to keep that front and center and connect the business objectives with our data initiatives. So with that in mind, thank you very much. I hope you found that useful. Here is my LinkedIn QR code if you would like to reach out or connect with me. And finally, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to DynamicsCon Virtual for hosting this event, all of the organizers who put a huge amount of time and effort into the user group. And I know from being there in Denver back in May, and I really look forward to hopefully being with you guys in Chicago and meeting some people who are hopefully on this presentation. So once again, thank you, and we'll speak to you soon. Fantastic. Thank you for joining, everyone. We've had 1 or 2 questions in the chat, so please pop any other questions in if you have any. The first question was, what are the most common data challenges you're seeing? We spend a lot of time removing duplicate records. Yeah, very, very common. Duplicate records nowadays, we've got a high influx of data coming from users, from API integrations, file upload, so it's coming from all over the place, and ultimately we want a single customer view, which is what we were speaking about in the presentation. So duplicate's a huge challenge for sure, especially when you're trying to then layer up, and we're trying to implement AI nowadays, at least starting to. I would say the second focus is around data cleansing, so standardization of data so that we can interpret that data correctly, whether that be standardization of countries so that we can segment data correctly, or to some other forms of data cleansing around email, phone address, etc. The final one we're seeing at the moment is around data retention. We're seeing that lots of organizations have spent a lot of time and effort collecting this data, only to find that it's not necessarily useful in the organization anymore. So data created in the 80s and 90s that has come over from historic applications. So trying to cut out and build rules around retaining data that is useful in the business, especially that you're going to make a decision on. Okay, hopefully that was useful. One was I stepped away earlier. What was number 1 and 2 around the common data challenges? I will grab the presentation. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn or reach out via email or in a chat, please let me know, and I can send the presentation. We'll cover off those 2 points, no problem. Okay, a few thank yous. And yeah, I think that's probably everything for now, but please drop any questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring the Umbrella stream all day, so feel free to reach out, see if anything else comes in before people jump off to their next presentation. What tools do we use? Have a quick look on our LinkedIn profile. We actually help organizations to improve the quality of their data, so we leverage our own tools. Great license pricing on your own tools. But yeah, but there's lots of tools out there. You know, there are lots of organizations who are Microsoft ISVs. There'll be people speaking at this event. There will be, there's forums, there's communities where people are speaking about solutions for all sorts of data challenges. So by all means, again, send me a message and I can talk about that a little bit more. Sure, I will share my contact information in the chat. I will also grab my LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out. Any questions on the presentation, feel free. We'd love to connect, especially if you're going to be at DynamicsCon in person next year in Chicago. We'll likely be there, so indeed. I was actually speaking to someone yesterday and found out that they're from Colorado and they were actually in Denver at the same time. We just had no idea at the time. So yeah, we'll definitely now sync up in Chicago.